What really happened behind Vatican walls in the final days of Pope Francis? Was his passing just the natural end of a long life? Or is there more we haven't been told? The sudden silence, the rising conspiracies, the power plays happening just beneath the surface. It's all pointing to a story bigger than anyone expected. As the world mourns a spiritual giant, whispers of deeper truths grow louder. From his last Easter message to the secretive conclave already forming, this isn't just about loss, it's about legacy, loyalty, and the future of faith. Stay with us. The truth begins now. The final days of Pope Francis. On April 21st, 2025, the world lost not just a spiritual leader, but a symbol of humility, courage, and reform. Pope Francis passed away in Vatican City at the age of 88, just one day after he appeared, frail but present, during Easter Sunday's blessing. Though visibly weakened, his final public act was a message of peace, compassion, and the need for dialogue in a world fractured by war and hate. In the last moments of his life, Francis remained deeply committed to his mission. Despite battling double pneumonia and chronic respiratory issues, he insisted on being seen on Easter, blessing a crowd of over 35,000 from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. His words, though read by an aide, struck a chord. There can be no peace without freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and respect for others. Just weeks before, he had been hospitalized for over a month. Doctors urged him to rest, but he returned to Vatican City, refusing to miss one of the holiest days on the Catholic calendar. Though he did not preside over Mass, his brief appearance marked a poignant farewell. Many believe he knew his time was near, and he wanted to say goodbye his way. As Vatican bells tolled across Rome, the world paused. Leaders, believers, even critics of the Church reflected on the legacy of a man who chose simplicity over luxury, dialogue over dogma, and people over protocol. But how did a humble Jesuit from Argentina rise to become one of the most talked about popes in modern history? To understand the full impact of his death, we need to take a step back to the moment it all began. Because what Pope Francis built didn't start at the top. It began with a simple vow, a lifelong mission, and a voice that dared to speak up for the voiceless. A papacy like no other. Jorge Mario Bergoglio's journey to becoming Pope Francis was anything but ordinary. Born in Buenos Aires in 1936, the son of Italian immigrants, he was known for his deep empathy and street-level humility, even as a young priest. When he was elected Pope on March 13, 2013, he broke over the 300 years of tradition, becoming the first non-European pope since the early days of the Church. From the beginning, he made bold, unprecedented choices. He chose not to live in the lavish apostolic palace, but instead took up residence in the modest Domus Sanctae Marthae guest house. He opted for simpler clothing, carried his own bags, and declined the heavily armored papal car. "How I wish for a church that is poor and for the poor," he once declared, setting the tone for everything that followed. His papacy was marked by strong, sometimes divisive stances. He condemned consumerism, defended immigrants, and spoke out on climate change and LGBTQ+ inclusion. He made it clear the Church was not a museum of saints, but a hospital for sinners. "Who am I to judge?" he said when asked about gay priests. 5 words that changed global discourse and sent shockwaves through traditionalist circles. But not everyone approved. Conservative Catholics criticized him for diluting doctrine. Some even accused him of undermining centuries-old teachings. Still, he stayed the course. In his own words, "Time is greater than space." A cryptic phrase, but one he believed deeply. It meant that change would come slowly, but it would come. Yet behind every revolutionary leader is a human being, a man bound by flesh and limitations. And for Pope Francis, the heavy demands of the office began to take a visible toll. His strength, once symbolic of renewal, was gradually giving way to something else entirely. Fragility. The health decline, no one could ignore. In recent years, concern for Pope Francis's health grew louder. In his youth, he had part of a lung removed due to infection. In 2021, he underwent colon surgery. Then came the more alarming episodes, his struggles with sciatica, chronic knee pain, and finally, the onset of serious lung infections that would eventually take his life. In March 2025, he was hospitalized for 5 weeks with pneumonia in both lungs. He also faced signs of early-stage kidney failure. While the Vatican remained guarded about his exact condition, insiders say. The Pope's strength was diminishing rapidly. Despite warnings from doctors and advisors, he refused to delegate much of his workload. He simply said, "A shepherd must smell like his sheep." Even in a wheelchair, Pope Francis insisted on attending major events. He took pride in appearing before the faithful, even if only for moments. On Easter Sunday, April 20th, he did just that, giving the Urbi et Orbi blessing from the balcony, seated and silent, while an aide read his speech. Behind closed doors, sources reported that he had already bid farewell to key advisors. Some say he prepared his last words days before Easter. His death was not sudden. It was foreseen. But it was still heartbreaking. "He gave everything," said Cardinal Kevin Farrell. "He died as he lived, serving." Now, the Vatican faces not only the loss of a spiritual titan, but the reality of an empty throne. And the question on everyone's lips is the same. Who will be next? Who dares to step into the shoes of a man who redefined the papacy for the modern world? The Pope who broke all the rules. When Pope Francis stepped onto the world stage, many expected another traditional papal reign. What they got instead was a revolution in white robes. From his very first days, he defied expectations, not by shouting, but by acting with disarming humility. And the message was clear. The Church had to change, or risk losing its soul. He started with the Vatican itself. Under his leadership, financial reforms swept through the Holy See. For decades, Vatican finances had been shrouded in secrecy, plagued by scandal. But Francis demanded transparency. He shut down questionable accounts, held top officials accountable, and launched investigations into long-ignored corruption. "The Church must be credible," he once said, "and that begins with its own house." His next focus? Compassion over condemnation. Francis made global headlines when he said, "Who am I to judge?" in reference to gay priests. For many LGBTQ+ Catholics, it was the first time they felt seen, not scorned, by their spiritual leader. In 2023, he approved blessings for same-sex couples, not marriage, but recognition. That distinction still upset conservatives, but it was a monumental step. He also elevated the role of women in the Church. While he stopped short of opening the priesthood, Francis appointed women to key Vatican positions, more than any pope before him. He invited dialogue, open discussions, and called for a more listening Church. It was subtle, yes, but seismic. "Without women, the Church falls," he once said. But as Pope Francis reshaped doctrine and dusted off long-closed doors, murmurs of resistance began to build. And those murmurs turned into movements. Within the very walls of the Vatican, factions began plotting for what would come next, and who would inherit the throne. The power struggle begins. Who comes next? With Pope Francis gone, the Vatican is preparing for a papal conclave, arguably the most secretive and powerful election on earth. Cardinals from around the world will gather behind locked doors to decide who will become the next pope. But this isn't just a vote. It's a battle between two visions of the Church. On one side are the progressives. They want to continue Francis's legacy, inclusion, transparency, and global engagement. They see a Church that leads with compassion, speaks to the youth, and adapts to modern issues. On the other side, the conservatives, those who believe Francis went too far, too fast. They long for tradition, order, and a return to older teachings. Key names are already being whispered. Cardinal Matteo Zuppi of Italy, known for his Francis-like warmth. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, an insider with vast political experience. And then there's Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle of the Philippines, the media favorite, a bridge between the global South and Rome. But there's more to this than ideology. Age, alliances, and behind-the-scenes deals will shape the conclave. Only cardinals under the age of 80 can vote, 135 of them. And some voters, while appointed by Francis, may surprise everyone with their choice. As one insider said, the Holy Spirit moves, but so do agendas. And at the center of this swirling storm is one man, Cardinal Tegel. Once called the Asian Francis, his rise seemed destined. But now questions are surfacing. Is he truly the Church's next leader? Or is there more to his story than meets the eye? Cardinal Luis Tegel, savior or scapegoat? Luis Antonio Tegel, a name that inspires hope in some and suspicion in others. As one of the most recognized Catholic leaders in Asia, Tegel was often seen as Pope Francis's spiritual heir. His gentle tone, his defense of the marginalized, and his global appeal made him a top contender. But with fame comes scrutiny, and now that scrutiny is turning into pressure. Born in Manila, Tegel rose rapidly through the ranks. As Archbishop of Manila, he was beloved by the people. Francis later brought him to Rome, placing him at the head of the dicastery for evangelization, a powerful post. His role? Spreading the gospel in the 21st century. Many believed this move was part of a long game, grooming him for the papacy. Yet, in recent months, Tegel's past has been dragged into the spotlight. Critics point to allegations of financial mismanagement during his time in the Philippines. Others accuse him of looking the other way during clerical abuse cases, charges he has strongly denied. Supporters argue it's all politics. They fear what he represents, said one source close to the Vatican. A church that belongs to the poor, not the powerful. Despite the whispers, Tegel remains silent. He continues his duties, avoids the spotlight, and leaves his future, perhaps even his destiny, in the hands of God and the College of Cardinals. Whether he will be chosen or cast aside is anyone's guess. As the doors of the conclave prepare to close, the air in Vatican City grows heavy, not just with mourning, but with tension. And what happens behind those ancient walls could determine the future of faith for over 1 billion people. The shadow over Tegel, allegations and accusations. As Cardinal Tegel rises in prominence, so too do the shadows around him. Once seen as the ideal bridge between tradition and reform, he now finds himself facing increasing criticism, not just from conservative critics, but from within his own ranks. And these aren't just rumors. They're carefully timed questions, arriving at the worst possible moment. The first concern? Financial mismanagement. While Tegel led the Archdiocese of Manila, reports surfaced of poorly audited funds, donor money inconsistently tracked, and unaccounted spending during a time when many Filipino Catholics were struggling. Though no official charges were made, Vatican insiders admit the optics are troubling. You can't be the next pope with an asterisk, one cardinal reportedly said. Second, and more seriously, is the issue of clerical abuse. While no direct accusations have been levied against Tegel himself, critics argue he failed to move decisively against priests facing allegations during his tenure. They claim he preferred quiet transfers over public accountability, an approach the Church can no longer afford. Silence is complicity, said one survivors advocacy group. Still, others defend him passionately. Tegel is being targeted, said a Jesuit source close to his inner circle. He embodies everything Francis stood for: openness, humility, compassion. That scares people who want to take the Church backwards. His supporters insist the timing of these criticisms, right before the conclave, is no coincidence. So the question remains, are these issues genuine disqualifiers or political weapons? The conclave will have to decide whether to focus on the man's message or the murmurs behind the curtain. But Tegel isn't the only figure surrounded by whispers. In the sacred halls of the Vatican, there's always more than one game in motion. And now, as the Church prepares to choose its next leader, politics and religion are becoming harder to separate. The Vatican's political chessboard. The world often sees the Church as timeless, spiritual, and above the fray of politics. But within the marble halls of the Vatican, power plays are as strategic as any global summit. With Pope Francis gone, the jockeying has begun. And what's at stake is far more than just a name in white robes. First, we must acknowledge the soft power of the Vatican. Despite being a spiritual institution, it holds diplomatic ties with over 180 countries. Francis himself was a frequent critic of populism, nationalism, and the climate crisis. Whoever comes next will not only guide 1.4 billion Catholics, but influence how the Church interacts with global leaders on war, migration, and morality. Second, there's the ideological divide. Conservatives see this conclave as a chance to reset the Church, to walk back some of Francis's more progressive moves. They've been preparing for this moment for years: quiet dinners, aligned media outlets, backroom deals. As one source said, they want someone less talk, more tradition. Third, regional alliances are shifting. Africa, Latin America, and Asia now hold a larger share of cardinal votes than ever before. These blocs could swing the election toward a non-European pope once again, or surprise everyone with a compromise candidate no one expects. And finally, the question of control. The Vatican Bank, canon law reforms, even the language used in Mass, all are up for review under a new papacy. These aren't just details, they're flashpoints in a church struggling to decide, do we adapt or do we return? And as the world watches, hungry for truth, the media has entered the scene like never before. But are they clarifying the chaos or adding fuel to the fire? The media frenzy, truth or tactic? In the age of 24/7 news and viral headlines, no event stays sacred for long, not even the death of a pope. Since Pope Francis's passing, media platforms across the globe have swarmed Vatican City, each fighting to break the next exclusive. But in this digital storm, facts and fiction are blending in dangerous ways. Major outlets reported Pope Francis's death respectfully, focusing on his legacy of compassion and reform. But the moment attention turned to the conclave and its contenders, the tone shifted. Headlines asked if there was more to the story. Commentators hinted at conspiracies. Social media exploded with theories, some eerily detailed, some laughably absurd. Tegel's name was mentioned often, with articles either praising him as the spiritual successor or dragging up every possible blemish. "It's a media trial," said one Vatican analyst. "The public is forming opinions before the cardinals even enter the chapel." Meanwhile, the Vatican's own communication office is struggling to maintain control. Official statements are cautious, careful, sometimes too quiet. The void is quickly filled by bloggers, influencers, even rogue priests who claim to have inside knowledge. One viral video even suggested Francis's death was timed for political effect. A convenient coincidence, it said. No evidence, just insinuation. But the real risk? The faithful themselves are being pulled into the noise. Millions of Catholics around the world are tuning in, not just for updates, but for answers. And the louder the media grows, the more difficult it becomes to find the truth buried beneath the headlines. And then came the most dangerous shift of all. Not just rumors, but conspiracy. Not just questions, but suspicion. Could Pope Francis's death have been something else entirely? Pope Francis's journey may have ended, but his impact has only just begun to shape the world he left behind. We've uncovered the tributes, the tensions, the whispered theories, and now a church stands at a crossroads. Whether his death was purely fate or something more, one thing is certain: the decisions made in the days ahead will echo for generations. Thank you for joining us as we explored the truth behind the headlines. If this story moved you, like, comment, and subscribe for more untold chapters from history's most powerful institutions. Rest in peace, Pope Francis. The world will remember.